Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining today's Career Coaches Insights webinar, Working It Out, Attachment Trauma, Healing, and Growth in Your Career and Everywhere with special guest Jim Hjort. My name is Amy Rueda, and I am Senior Executive Director for Professional Programs and Services. I want to take this opportunity to thank our Alumni Association sustaining donors. It is with your help that we are able to strengthen the Bruin community with career programs like this. For some general webinar housekeeping, we will have time at the end of our program for Q&A with our speaker, time permitting. So please use the Q&A function below to submit your questions. We will be recording the tonight's event, and we'll send out the recording when it is available. Now, to start our program, I am excited to introduce Jim. Jim holds a bachelor's degree in sociology, a master's degree in social work, and is a licensed clinical social worker. Jim specializes in helping professionals navigate vocational change by drawing on the confidence born of innate wisdom and proven science. He offers in-depth workups on individuals contemplating a career change, strategic planning for those facing career disruptions or workplace challenges. He utilizes a step-by-step guidance process to break through achievement plateaus by using cutting-edge motivational science. Jim has provided coaching for organizations such as Ultimed and Loyola Marymount School of Television and Film. He also serves as an expert lecturer on Crystal Cruises voyages and has been quoted or published in media outlets such as Self, Fast Company, and Psych Central. Additionally, he has appeared as a guest on morning television programs across the United States. Jim, we are excited to have you with us. And again, thank you so much, and I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, thank you so much, Amy, and good evening, everybody. This is my favorite speaking engagement of the year, every year. Coming back home, as it were, although virtually now, but coming back home to UCLA and spending an evening with Bruins is one of my favorite things. And so I really feel privileged to be here with you all again tonight. I want to say too to Amy and Sarah, who's behind the scenes, kind of pulling some technological strings. I have the privilege of seeing sort of behind the curtain of all the work that our Alumni Association staff do for us, and it's really remarkable, the dedication that they have. So I just want to thank both of you and the rest of your team on behalf of all of the alumni. So thank you. So if you've been to one of my talks before, which I think this is number 5 or 6, then you know that I tend to be pretty ambitious in terms of what I plan to cover in a mere 1 hour. And there's no exception tonight. So without further ado, why don't we get moving on tonight's presentation. We're going to be talking about attachment trauma, and who this is for is a pretty long list this time. If you're stagnant in your career, a workaholic, feel like an imposter sometimes, the imposter syndrome that we've probably all heard of. Unsure whether you're on the right path, in work or in life. Feel like you're inconsistent, or if your relationships are volatile, the ones at work or at home, or any other area of your life. You're impulsive, hypervigilant maybe. Okay, so this is going to capture a lot of people. The premise that we're going to be working with tonight is that you don't have to identify as a traumatized person in order for attachment trauma to have happened to you or to be affecting you by virtue of someone else's trauma. Okay. We inhabit a world that's built around the person that we believe we are. Okay. And that person that we believe we are is sometimes the person that others needed us to be, or wanted us to be, or maybe even coerced us to be, knowingly or unknowingly. Okay, and we can get stuck in that life, okay, in that identity. The difficult experiences that we have, whether they're attachment related or otherwise, can be portals to greater knowledge of ourselves and into post-traumatic growth. That's one of my areas of special interest, post-traumatic growth. And the hard truth of post-traumatic growth is that you can't have it without trauma. Okay. So I guess the good news is that we're all going to experience difficulty. And so the question then is, what do we do with that difficulty in order to maximize the potential benefit to us? So I want to also just drop this in right up front. People may remember this image from prior talks. When I am addressing you, when I'm thinking about you, when I'm working with clients, anytime I'm interacting with an individual in a helping capacity, and I try to in my personal life too, I realize that they're not just one thing and they're not just acting in one domain. Okay, these are the 4 domains that comprise the total of our lives.
Jim, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
I don't know if your deck is up, but we can't see slides in case they are
Oh,
supposed to be up. Sorry about that.
is that better?
Yep, we're good.
Oh, okay. So over here, we've got the physical domain. Here, the psychological, social, and vocational. And these 4 then comprise the whole of you. And so although I'm coming to you tonight in the context of the career engagement, platform, I'd really encourage you to think about everything we're talking about tonight as having the potential to affect you in any area of your life, because these 4 do not operate independently. They're interdependent. So any changes in one necessarily cause changes in the others. Okay. So you're a whole person, a whole multi-dimensional person, if you will. Okay. And so that's the way I'm approaching this talk. And I hope you can too. Here's a little bit more about me, just briefly. Personal development trainer, mindfulness meditation teacher, also trained and certified through UCLA, hypnotherapist. And when I'm wearing a different hat, I'm a psychotherapist and a psychiatric social worker. And until last year, I was working at UCLA at the partial hospitalization program connected to Resnick. I'm currently at a different institution in a teaching program where I'm teaching internal medicine residents behavioral health and how to be more behavioral health sensitive in their practice. So here's my motto, I guess, insight plus applied science for peak performance and well-being. Sometimes we think those 2 are mutually exclusive. I can either be happy or successful. I don't agree with that. And actually, I think the 2 really go hand in hand. And of course, I'm a Bruin, very proud Bruin. Okay, so what is trauma? It's actually a 17th century Greek word, translates directly to wound. In our modern dialogue, we usually talk about trauma in the context of PTSD, I think, or at least until recently. We've talked about it mostly in terms of PTSD. And there's a specific type of trauma that qualifies, if you will, for PTSD. Now, back when I'm a trauma therapist is one of the things I do. And when I first started training many years ago, we distinguished between what we called big T trauma and little t trauma. And nowadays, those terms aren't used quite so much because I think it sort of rank orders trauma in a way that doesn't really fit people's experience. Trauma can be life altering, whether it's big T or little t. But what those terms referred to were the definition of PTSD by the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Psychiatry, is that you either have to be exposed to death, serious injury, or sexual violence by experiencing it, witnessing it, or learning about it secondhand. Okay. And then repeated exposure to details of it. So kind of a narrow definition. And then in recent years, we've heard more about this term, complex PTSD or CPTSD. And what that is when you have that big T trauma, like I just described, but it's chronic instead of a single instance. Okay, so for instance, a soldier going to war, or someone experiencing abuse throughout their childhood, say. This kind of abuse, though, the big T trauma. Okay, well, that plus they've identified these three signs and symptoms that you tend to see along with the more traditional signs and symptoms of PTSD. You put those together and you can justify a diagnosis of complex PTSD. Europe has already pretty widely adopted this as a diagnosis, and in ICD-11, which is what the doctors use to specify a diagnosis that they can bill to, there is a CPTSD definition, and this is it. Okay, so basically PTSD with these other three things stacked on top of it. Here in the US, we're still on ICD-10, and it's probably going to be several years before we adopt ICD-11. So currently, we don't have a mechanism for diagnosing someone with this specifically. The DSM also does not recognize CPTSD as a diagnosis at this time. So what they did do, though, is they expanded the definition, expanded the diagnostic criteria of PTSD a little bit to include some of these, okay? But point being, but whether it's Europe or here, we're talking about these types of symptoms that are separate from traditional PTSD needing to occur within the context of a big T trauma. However, we see these things show up in other conditions that don't involve big T trauma, okay? Specifically right here, I'm talking about borderline personality disorder. These three would be a sort of the hallmark of that condition. And we know that it stems from attachment trauma. Okay. Attachment trauma, then, it can occur with or without a big T trauma. And so in the old days, we referred to things that might cause attachment trauma as little T trauma. But again, it's really a misnomer to call them that, because certainly attachment trauma can be life-altering and lasting, and cause a great deal of difficulty to the person affected and the people around them. And it comes from a disruption of the attachment process in childhood. Okay. It's not a life sentence. It is somewhat subject to change as adults. We'll talk more about that. Okay. So then, next question, what is attachment? Well, we go back to the origins of attachment. We find kind of an unusual source, which is this gentleman, Konrad Lorenz. He was an animal behaviorist, and he studied ducks. That was his thing. He studied how imprinting works in ducks, and he spent some time trying to figure out, what is it about the mother duck that causes the ducklings to follow her around? Is it the color of her feathers? Is it some pheromone that she's giving off? What is it exactly? And one day it sort of dawned on him. He ruled out most every other characteristic of the duck, and he said, well, maybe it's something she's doing. And so he kind of looked at the problem from a different angle and discovered that it was the speed that the duck walked past the ducklings that caused the imprinting to take place. So this was a little eye-opening experience, right? That it was not some kind of intrinsic quality or extrinsic quality, for that matter, of the duck, that the duck had no control over, whether she was born or not with this color feather. It was a relationship event that was mediated by behavior. So behavior, okay? Behavior and how you act in relationship is what caused the imprinting to take place. And he proved it by, he had some ducklings, and he walked at this speed that he determined was the imprinting speed. And sure enough, the ducks started following him around. And he built a whole career on this. There's all kinds of pictures of Konrad Lorenz and ducks. So very fascinating. And someone else was following his work John Bowlby. So John Bowlby, he was a child psychiatrist, and he was in training to be a psychoanalyst. And he saw this work, and he said, okay, well, wait, if it works for ducks, ducks can't be all that special. Every complex organism has to have some kind of attachment system like this, then. Some way that behavior keeps young in close proximity to an older adult, a protector in times of danger. And so he wanted to experiment with this with his population that he was treating, which was children. He wanted to work with the parents and see if he might be able to initiate some change in the kids via the parents and some sort of mechanism of action there. His supervisor wouldn't allow that. His supervisor happened to be Melanie Klein, who was developing object relations theory at the time, and she was locked in this battle with Anna Freud to be the dominant figure in psychology of the day. It was very dramatic. So, but she said, no, you're in my lane, stay in my lane. And but Bowlby didn't like object relations. It's a lot more fantasy oriented. He was very down to earth, and he said, well, I think it warrants further exploration, how parenting can have a bearing on the outcomes of kids. And so he went off on his own, which was pretty bold back then. Psychology was a pretty small world back then, and to just sort of walk away from Melanie Klein was something. It was brave, is what it was. So he went off on his own, and he hired a research assistant who turned out to be Mary Ainsworth, who we'll talk a little bit more about in a few minutes, but another luminary in psychology. So the two of them together are really responsible for the development of attachment theory. And here's how I think of attachment theory. Okay. It's really how we see the world of others. Object relations was about this, how we sort of symbolize the world of others inside, internally, how we imagine the world. This is very much real world. How those early relationships really set us off on a course through the relational world that tends to endure throughout life. So they figured out, just like Lorenz figured out it was the walking speed for children, for human children, they figured out that there's a few really, really key ingredients. One is consistent attunement to a baby's needs, but imperfect attunement. Okay. So, the helicopter parenting is not ideal. What you want is every now and then to not be attuned to the baby, and the baby cries, and maybe one time out of 10 someone doesn't come right away, and that's really important because the baby begins to learn that sometimes the baby has to rely on him or herself, and it's very crucial to their development. Okay. Unconditional positive regard. The three S's, which are really sort of the outgrowth of these two. This, a sense of safety. So, first the home that the infant is brought into being a safe place, but later on a more abstract sense of safety, that you provide a safe world for them, and certainly that you won't be a source of fear for the baby. Okay. And then as the child grows, then that safe home base should ideally grow with them, so that as they become more mobile, they can explore the world and make mistakes and maybe do something bad sometimes, and then come back home and still find a safe home base where they're loved just as they are, and then soothed when they're hurt. Okay. Now, when we're born, no one comes to us and asks us first, right? Hey, how would you feel about being born into this world that has a lot of pain and suffering, a lot of beauty and joy too, but it's a very difficult existence? What do you think? Are you up for it? No, no one asks. They just do it. And the price for that, if you're the parent bringing the child into the world, the price of that is you got to provide these things. Okay, that's the deal. Now, unfortunately, the deal, their end of the bargain isn't always held up. Okay, but that is supposed to be the deal. So attachment trauma is when those needs go unmet. Okay. Now, people downplay attachment trauma all the time. I hear things like this every day, like other people had it so much worse than me, or um, it's not like it was a life and death situation. My dad was always present for me, but my mom, yeah, she was too depressed, to ever get out of bed and do anything for us. And I did everything else instead. I did all the housework for her instead, but it wasn't that bad, right? Or my parents, they never hit me. They used to say, yeah, I'll give you something to complain about whenever I would, complain about something at school or not being able to have a toy I wanted. I'll give you something to complain about. They never followed through. Okay. So these are the ways that we downplay things that are actually very much counter to what we need when we're kids. And then the younger we are, the more magnified the impact of those things is. Some animals are born pretty much ready to go, like a baby deer. I've seen these wildlife shows. The deer is born, and 5 minutes later, it's walking around eating grass. It's a little wobbly on its legs, but it can fend for itself more or less. Well, we're not like that. We're not like that at all. We're born as little kind of jelly beans, defenseless. And although we don't even know that we're, excuse me, that we are a separate independent entity at that time when we're born, we are born with some hard wiring to know that we are defenseless and that these big people, these big creatures around us are going to take care of our survival for us. If we do what they want, if we meet expectations. Okay. If not, we'll get voted off the island and have to fend for ourselves, which up to a certain age, we wouldn't be able to do. Okay. Again, we're not consciously thinking this way, but this is how we're wired. So, therefore, when we're born into the family, we become who that family system needs us to be with every ounce of our being. Okay. Whether we wanted to or not, they still didn't ask us, right? It's the role that we're born into, and we take it or we leave it. That's the choice we're given. So we wind up in this situation, and then so we're born into this family. We're born into pre-existing family dynamics, and then we do become self-aware at some point, and we start looking around. We start listening to what is told to us, and we start drawing some conclusions. The old children are better seen than heard. Right. So I've got to blend in. I've got to keep my mouth closed and just kind of disappear if I want to live, basically, right? And emotions are shameful. Suppress them. I used to think that was mostly men that received that message, but I don't think that anymore because I have met so many women who were given the same messaging. Boys don't cry. Well, so kind of cuts both ways, right? The boy, suppress all those emotions. You're never going to be a man that way. And suppressing difficult emotions wreaks havoc on us. To the girl might be, well, no, you on the other hand, you're the one that's out of control. You're the one that's the emotional one. So there, go ahead. Sort of minimizing or diminishing that that child, perhaps. In this family, we take blank seriously. Yeah. You better too. The parentified child. Often the oldest, but not always. And then they grow up finding it extremely difficult to um, put themselves first in a healthy way. Okay. So understand, this isn't about like making the decision of being generous and devoting oneself to taking care of others, starting from zero and making that conscious decision. This, what we're talking about, attachment trauma, it's like these things that they say and do. It's like they're in the air. You know, it's like the part of the air that you breathe and the water that you drink in that home. That I am all about self-sacrifice. If I'm not self-sacrificing, I'm nothing. And that's different. That's way different than adopting a certain value system. That's, you know, sacrificing yourself in the interest of survival. And by the way, like I want to say too, sometimes these are also implicit, just like these messages. Like, so for instance, what's an example? Like for instance, in this family, we take blank seriously. Maybe, I don't know, say it's sports, you know, and you have two kids and one's good at sports and the other isn't. They're more literary or something. And the sports oriented one is lavished with praise and positive regard, and it's not lavished on the other one. Well, you don't have to say it, right? It's in the air. Again, it's sort of in the air that you breathe. The child learns it. And you know what? And I'll say too, sometimes it's never said. Sometimes it's never said until that person lands in a therapy office, you know, 40 or 50 years later, and finally the light bulb goes on. That this is the belief that I've been operating under all these years. So here are the attachment styles. Now, these were found by Ainsworth gets credit for these. She was the research assistant that we mentioned earlier. So the strange situation, I don't know, you might remember it from Psych 101 in college, but you would have the baby in a room and you would have the mother come in and then a strange assistant come in and then the mother leave and the assistant remain and then the mother alone and the assistant leaves. And so various combinations of the stranger and the mother being around. And then by interpreting how the child responded to those different scenarios, you would then classify them into one of the attachment styles. You'll see these named different things in various locations. There's no sort of consensus about this, what the hyphenated ones are called, but that's what we're going with tonight. So let's take these one at a time. And then earn secure is kind of a fifth subcategory of secure. It's if you do the work to heal the attachment trauma, you can earn yourself the secure attachment that you should have developed naturally, but you didn't. Okay, but so all hope is not lost. That's probably my favorite of the five. You know, you really earn that one. Oh, before we get into the styles, just some thoughts of mine. You know, keep in mind these can be a little bit reductionist, and they are not mutually exclusive. Some overlap sometimes in people. Also, if you have a light bulb go on tonight and you're like, oh, geez, I'm definitely this attachment style, let me fix that. Well, remember, the attachment trauma is a relational thing. It comes out of relationship, and that's the way it needs to be worked through as well. Okay, it's not really a kind of do-it-yourself project. certain types of attachment styles and certain types of attachment trauma tend to show up more in intimate relationships than others. I've had people who, to their friends and family, would not, set off any sort of alarms of having any sort of attachment trauma, but in their intimate partnership, it's a very different story, and the relationship there is unlike any other that either of those people have in other relationships in their life. That's just simply because the more intimate the relationship, generally the more vulnerable we need to be. And these attachment wounds can go very deep. And so sometimes it's only the deepest relationships that touch the deepest raw nerves and wounds. So for each of these, I have a little quote here of what a person with this attachment style might say. It is relatively easy for me to become emotionally close to others. I am comfortable depending on others and having others depend on me. I don't worry about being alone or having others not accept me. Great. So this person has a healthy sense of self, meaning they're good at setting boundaries. People don't walk all over them, but they also don't take advantage of other people. Um, high levels of empathy. Low fear of failure. Why? Well, because maybe they came from a family in which their sense of self, their identity, wasn't conditioned upon performance. Okay. High desire to achieve, but not to sort of earn my dinner or to earn my place, but for a more pure reason, maybe, like for one's own personal development, mastery, exploration. One way you could think about this is, the motivation of attachment trauma is more of like an aversive motivation, as though something's chasing you or you want to get away from this experience. The person with a secure attachment style is more, it's more of an attractive motivation. Okay, I want to add this thing to my life. I want to have more of this stuff. And it's a lot, it's a very different way to live, If you think metaphorically about, let's say there's one person running down the street, being chased by Freddy Krueger, right? And they're running away from him, versus someone running down the street because that's their morning workout and they like to start the day that way. They're both running, but they are both having a very different experience of that. Whole people. Okay. Low risk for enmeshment. Enmeshment, codependence is the more pop culture word for that. If I don't know the vintage of people in the audience, but if you've seen the movie Jerry Maguire, the catchphrase "You complete me," that's enmeshment. I love the movie, love that scene, but that not the way we want to model our relationships. Okay. So in the workplace, you're the confident, competent person. You can assert your views in a healthy way so that they're heard, but you aren't, again, like steamrolling over people. You like being counted on. You can delegate. You don't have everything riding on this. Okay, you're relatively undefended. We were actually talking about this before we got on, the three of us, Amy and Sarah and I, about how attachment trauma can leave one hyper vigilant, and defended, and just ready to fight off someone who's attacking them, psycho-emotionally speaking, or just not willing to let someone in very far. Okay, and it's difficult sometimes for people to trust people like that, because the other person might feel like they're hiding something. That might be their assumption, right? People might not assume that you're defending. They might think you're hiding. Okay. So maybe for our purposes tonight, we can hold the secure attachment style as or the earned secure, as the case may be, as the ideal that we're going for. And we have dismissive. I am comfortable without close emotional relationships. It is very important to me to feel independent and self-sufficient, and I prefer not to depend on others or have others depend on me. So in the workplace, this person might be the one who says this. I'm not here to make friends, just here to do my job and leave. Okay, fair enough. I mean, it's a valid point of view. What's the cost to that person? Well, being out of the loop, right? I mean, whether it's the kind of official work things like job opportunities, maybe not hearing about them, or being volunteering to join a committee or something so they can learn about new initiatives, or even just the water cooler talk, where any of us who've worked in offices know that a lot of important things take place around the water cooler. And if you don't want to either delegate or be counted on, you're going to have a limited impact in that workplace. So working towards attachment security. So one thing is this, remind yourself that emotional closeness isn't necessary for a working relationship, and sharing extensive personal details isn't, required for either working relationships or emotional closeness. Okay. Let me maybe say more about that. The experience of being emotionally close with someone or connected with someone isn't something that is conditioned upon information. It can be. I mean, maybe information is a lubricant sometimes, but the felt experience of being emotionally close is something that's more intangible and subjective. I mean, it's something I experience as a therapist. Certainly, I don't. I know a lot of personal information about my clients. I share some, but not all personal information about me, and I have zero problem feeling emotionally close. Okay. And so it's up to you. Some working relationships are healthy and good and and do involve that sharing of information. So we're not saying here that one is right or one is wrong, but that um, there's some flexibility, and you get to decide. You get to decide what it's like for you. This one, so if you want to give delegating a try and you're a dismissive type person, one thing you might want to consider is emphasizing the outcome or the need that you're going for, the need that you need, the need that needs to be met, and the outcome that you're looking for, instead of the process. Okay. I mean, the process, it's got to, I want you to do this, then that, and the other, and then, it's got to look this way and then do this with it. There's a lot of points of failure there that might give you excuse to just say, oh, never mind, I'll do it myself, and dismiss that person. And if you really want to lean into this and try to do something about a dismissive attachment style, experiment. Do something low stakes, not something your job depends on maybe, but a smaller thing that you can delegate. And see if you can just say, hey, I'd like this outcome, or, this, output at the end. I trust you to do it in a way that works well for you, or something. Come to me if you have any questions, and then let that person own it. Be clear about your deal breakers. The output's got to be this, that, or the other, and please don't do this. Okay. But otherwise, give them some freedom. They'll appreciate that. And you are practicing trust. Being able to open up, even if it's just a small thing, just opening up a little bit and trusting someone a little bit more. Yeah, that's a nice one too, especially if you're delegating to a less a junior person or a younger person or something, rather than focusing on you and the task, what if you add into the equation that you're serving as sort of a mentor? You're giving someone an opportunity to learn and do something new. That might just stir a part of you that uh, maybe hasn't gotten a lot of exercise lately. Who knows where that could lead? So just an idea. And then practicing accountability. So that's another way of opening up. What if there's something in the workplace, some initiative you've been toying with, but you haven't taken action on because you really don't want to involve any other people and you need other people to do it, so therefore you don't do it. Well, again, you don't have to choose something big stakes, but what if it's a small thing that you could bring up and say, hey, I've been thinking about trying this. I think I'm going to do it. And now you've said it out loud. You've got people who are, going to be your accountability partners. And the outcome doesn't really matter if it's a small thing, especially. If it works out, great. If it doesn't, oh well. Not everything works out. It's okay. And this is a small way then to practice with trying something and opening up and letting someone know and see that you're trying something and then not having it work and the world not crashing down around you. Okay? Because that's what that little inner child of yours thinks is going to happen. So in using little baby steps, you're building up evidence to the contrary. I want to be completely emotionally intimate with others, but I often find that others are reluctant to get as close as I would like. I am comfortable being without close relationships, but I sometimes worry that others don't value me as much as I value them. Okay. Perceived as needy or clingy, maybe. Colleagues hold the person at arm's length because they're like, I don't know what I'm going to get, what I'm going to get next here. They feel alone. Unlike the last one, they feel alone and they don't like it. They very much want to be with people. And maybe they're not doing the job very well as a result because they feel like an outcast or a pariah. Okay. So one way to work toward attachment security, define this is very similar to the last one. What's the difference for you between a close relationship and a close work relationship? Are they different? Does it vary by person? Give some thought to this. And one thing I suggest with all of these is a real simple exercise. Draw some concentric circles, like maybe 5 of them, with a dot in the middle. The dot's you, and then that very innermost circle are going to be your most intimate relationships. And then outside of that, close friends, acquaintances, strangers, etc. And plot out your social universe on these concentric circles and see what it looks like. Is everyone clustered in the outer ring, like a bunch of asteroids, or are they all in the inner ring, burning to a crisp around Mercury, or are they, kind of evenly distributed? And then it might be interesting to kind of cross-reference that with, of these people, which ones are coworkers? Are you expecting too much of work relationships, perhaps? And just know that you have the ability to kick people to higher out orbits if you want, or bring them in. And again, as you adjust that, you're also going to need to adjust your vulnerability. Okay. So if you have a lot in the outer ring, it might be a good sign that you've maybe indulged your fear of vulnerability and being hurt too often. I'm looking at the clock, so I'm going to start speeding this up. Build more intimacy with existing relationships outside of work. Okay. So diversifying your social sphere, in other words. Do others know you value them? Or is that just a story that you're keeping to yourself in your mind? Yeah. What if you told them? Okay. What could happen? What might happen? You'll no matter what happens, you'll be changing that dynamic, that relationship. Yeah. So if you have this kind of pervasive sense that you've got you have low self-worth, or you have recurring negative thoughts about yourself, um, you know, it's possible that you might be you know, oops, I'm sorry, might be projecting onto other people. And so I'm going to actually give you, if we have time, an exercise to work with the difficult thoughts that you're having. Okay. Sorry, it's 6:51. Okay, last one. I am somewhat uncomfortable getting close to others. I want emotionally close relationships, but I find it difficult to trust others completely or to depend on them. I sometimes worry that I'll be hurt if I allow myself to become too close to others. Okay. Might be scared to take a stand, or fear of being abandoned, perhaps. And really kind of defined by ambivalence. Wants so badly to be close to people, but is just so terrified by that because of the vulnerability and the risk of being hurt or abandoned or what have you. And because of that, they tend to whipsaw back and forth and pull people in, push them away, pull them in, push them away. Kind of reactive. So people who might have otherwise been close or wanted to be close to the person might be scared away, and then some others might not be scared away, but then they get kind of sucked into the cycle of being pushed in and pushed out, and they might get hurt in the process and might end up leaving anyway. So it's a difficult experience, to be the fearful avoidant person. So practice grounding skills. The dustbuster is the tool I'm hoping to give you about working with those difficult thoughts. And then if you consistently find yourself kind of thinking negatively about someone, see if you can play a little, gamify it a little bit. Come up with an alternative story to explain the behavior of that person that's bothering you. So here's an example. An aggressive driver cuts you off on the freeway and you feel, I don't know, road rage, let's say. You could tell yourself, well, geez, I wonder if they're racing to the hospital because their wife is in labor. Okay. I hope it goes well. Is that the truth? Probably not, but it could be. And you don't know. That's the thing. And what we want to do is try to depower that reactivity to the negative that keeps you separated from people. Okay. And let's say you're on this one, your supervisor, say reprimands you for something or calls you in and puts you on a performance contract. And you have the instinct to be upset and mad with the boss, they're a horrible person. Or you could kind of reframe that. Well, wait a minute. If she really didn't like me and she really wanted to be mean to me, she'd probably fire me or discipline me in a different way. Actually, she was offering to, stand by me while I work on this, right? So I can do better. And I actually want to do better. Okay. So, and maybe, the whole reason I was upset is because I thought I was doing better. That's why I was upset. So actually, both of us want me to do better. Maybe there's not as much of a problem here as I thought. Okay. So again, just practicing. Oh, there it is. Reframing. Okay. So here's some top-down interventions. By the way, I forgot to mention, I will be offering the slides for you. So at the end, I'll give you a code and you can scan that. And if you'd like to sign up for my email list, you can download the slides. Happy to do that. So here's one grounding method. I won't spend much time on this, but this is a sort of a mindfulness related grounding method. Just take a breath and pause, and first, check 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, and then touch them. 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste. Those get more difficult kind of as you go, so you have to dial in your awareness a little bit more. And by the time you're done, you can feel a little bit more grounded. Again, with this, we're not trying to distract ourselves from the stress. We're trying to diversify our attention, that there's a stressful thing happening, and I can also see these things, touch these things, hear these things, so that your whole experience isn't dominated by a negative thing. Mindfulness of the breath. If you ever go check out my website, I've got some guided mindfulness meditations at hjort.com. And finally, the dust buster. So DUST, it's an acronym of mine, discouraging, unreliable self-talk. Any kind of thoughts you're having, self-talk you're having that has a harsh tone, that uses these absolute words, always, never, or everyone's out to get me, worst case scenarios are going to happen or are happening. If your thoughts are in the form of statements and not questions, if they're not aligned with your long-term well-being, and really anytime you're feeling any kind of negative emotional tone, it is a very high likelihood that you have some kind of dust floating around. Here's what they sound like. No one appreciates my contributions around here. If I make a mistake on this document, they'll fire me. Everyone else has a cheering section, and here I am trying to build a career all alone. My coworkers will try to get me in trouble at any opportunity. I thought I had the best job in the world, but now I know it was just a sham. Okay, you hear that? They're very different. The content's different, but the tone, it's very much like Debbie Downer, Yeah, anytime you're having a thought like that, let all the alarm bells be going off that I might have some dust going on. And then you're going to use the dust buster, which is the last page in the slides that I have for you to download. I have a fillable PDF of this, so you can print it or do it on your computer. So real quickly, what you want to do is you'll put the dust thought that you identified up here, come up with the evidence or the fact-based arguments that support that idea first, and then the facts or the fact-based arguments that refute the idea. And then we're going to acknowledge the event on the dust, summarize both sides, and do a reconciliation and statement of intention for what comes next. So for example, here's an example of dust. I was led to believe that they would listen to my ideas here, but they never do. And I can't stay somewhere that my voice is silenced. Okay, first we go to the evidence for, because we don't want to just refute and ignore the part of us that actually thinks there's a concern. Do that at your own peril, because if you do that, the voice of dust is just going to grow louder until you do pay attention to it. So just turn toward it and say, okay, what do we have here? Well, okay, it's true that I've never been asked for my opinion in a meeting. Okay. When I made a suggestion last week, it was only considered for 30 seconds. When I was interviewed, they emphasized being a team player. I can't trust people. And this is a great example of why. Okay, be careful when you're gathering this evidence, because something like this might sneak in. This is also dust. I can't trust people. And this is an example of why. That's an opinion. That's not a fact. What you would do if this happened on your dustbuster is you would see this and you would cross it out and put that at the top of another dustbuster and do a dustbuster about, I can't trust people. Okay, so just be careful that dust doesn't come in to support dust. Okay, that happens all the time. I feel awful when I believe I've been misled or not valued. Okay, now evidence against. Well, no one has ever asked for their opinion in the meetings I attend. It's not just me. I think the steering committee meets regularly for new ideas. Maybe that's where the people are asked. Team players can exist in every job description, from the custodial department to the C-suite. My boss apologized in my review for not having enough one-on-one time with me and says we'll make up for it, right? Coworkers and boss say they're happy with me. So the new perspective might sound something like this. Sometimes I feel silenced and not valued at work when people don't consider my ideas. If my voice doesn't matter here, I may need to quit. When I interviewed, they emphasize being a team player, but my opinions are never sought in meetings, and if I offer them, they draw little attention. I don't know if I was deliberately misled, but I definitely don't feel like a valuable member of the team. But on the other hand, I've only received positive feedback from my colleagues, and my boss sounds like she'll be receptive to my feedback in my upcoming review. The meeting I attend isn't one in which new ideas are discussed by anyone anyway, as opposed to the steering committee meeting. Plus, not every team player is an influential player. So, all things considered, this job is going well, and I have to be careful not to let past experiences unduly color my perspective. I'm going to continue being a team player in my current role and find the right opportunities to present good ideas. That way, I'll have a voice, and management may even be better able to see how valued I am too. My next step will be to ask my boss how to join the steering committee. Okay? So, unfortunately, we're not going to have enough time to finish, but I just want to point out that every word in this new perspective is a fact. Every word here is a fact, and every word here except for this uh, masquerading dust is a fact. The only part of this that was not a fact is the dust. So what we're doing is we're taking this dust that's unreliable and we're basically putting it on trial, right? And first it goes to the prosecution, and then it goes to the defense, and then it goes to the judge. And you're the judge, the wise you, okay, the wise part of you. So you'll see when, if you decide you want the slides, you'll see some additional content here about family systems and things. I apologize, we are out of time, but perhaps I'll layer some of this into next year's talk. Okay.
Jim, I want to thank you. You were generous with content and sound advice. And I have to tell you, I took copious notes. I just want to thank you. And I know everyone here this evening has enjoyed your presentation as well. We extend our greatest gratitude to you for joining us this evening.